Marriage is a special case in mobility because you can immediately move up or down depending upon who you marry. If you marry someone of a higher social class that has a lot of money, a lot of power, then you, to an extent, get to join that social class. It also can work if you marry someone with a lot less money and prestige than your family. You actually can drop social class rather quickly. This used to be the primary way that young women in our society were taught to move up and down, to move up, is, make yourself a good wife, make yourself attractive, and marry a rich doctor. And that was the best that you could hope for. Now, of course, women can achieve those things themselves. They don't have to marry into it. But we still do have instances of men and women who marry spouses who are higher than themselves in social class in order to kind of achieve that new social level through marriage. And then I have to say that conflict theorists will point out that a lot of this really is a myth. They call it the myth of mobility, just like they talked about the myth of meritocracy, that in fact people tend to stay right where they're born. The vast majority of people stay in the same social class where they're born. We just look at the instances like Bill Clinton or Oprah Winfrey or someone else who went from a very low social class to a very high social class, and we really play that up, and we don't talk about the millions and millions of people who didn't do that. And so it makes it look like we're able to achieve movement when in fact it's actually very rare. Okay, and then our final topic is poverty, and this is the people at the very bottom of the lower class. 12.6% of people in the U.S. are in poverty. That's 37 million people. And poverty is actually defined by the government, and there's a formula to tell you whether you're in poverty or not, because what poverty is not having enough money to afford the basic necessities of life. And so there's a poverty line for individuals and for families that the government comes up with. And the way they do this is they say, well, the three things that you actually need to live in our society are food, shelter, and clothing. And so they actually go shopping at the grocery stores all over the country and using USDA guidelines for how many calories you need in a day and how much nutrition, they shop for a year's worth of food. And they come up with a dollar figure for how much it costs for that year's worth of food. But that's only 1/3 of what's needed. And so for shelter and clothing, to come up with those numbers, they actually just use the same numbers that they came up with for food. So they multiply the food numbers that they get by 3 to come up with the total poverty level. So if the food costs $4,500 a year, then the poverty line would be 3 times $4,500 a year, which is $13,500 a year, which is about where the poverty line is. And so that's the formula that's used. They actually just come up with the food number and then multiply by 3, assuming that shelter and clothing will be about the same as for food. Some figures you need to know about people in poverty. 2/3 are white. That kind of goes against stereotype. 48%, almost half of them, work. So it's not just people living on government assistance who are in poverty. Almost half are actually working jobs. These are known as the working poor. And if you're working and in poverty, if you're making minimum wage, even working full-time, you're going to be living in poverty. And if you have even one child, you're even more likely to be in poverty. This is called the feminization of poverty, this tendency of people in poverty to become more, there to be more females living in poverty and to be more families living in poverty. In fact, this has become the typical person living in poverty. This picture that I have here of a white female single parent with a child is the typical person living in poverty in the United States. That's the most common group that's in poverty, are single white women with children. And the realities of that life, the realities of caring for that child and how much children cost for daycare and that kind of thing, makes it so that more and more women, particularly single women, are living in poverty. They simply aren't able to make enough money to support themselves and their children. And that's a real social problem. At the very bottom of the poverty scale are the homeless. 1.5 million is the actual government figure on homeless, but since this is based on the census and the census is mailed to people's houses, that number is a guess. The government goes out and tries to count as best they can homeless people in shelters and in places that they're known to frequent. But that number is probably actually very low. And then finally, you've got to talk about who's to blame for the problem of poverty. There's 2 places to put the blame. One is on the culture of poverty, which is to say that it's something about the norms and values of people in poverty themselves that's causing them to be poor. The other is to say, no, it's a byproduct of the capitalist system itself that's causing them to be poor, that it's a structural thing. It's something about the way society is set up that's causing people to end up in poverty. You can read more about those. I won't go into a lot of detail because we've run out of time here, but maybe the truth is somewhere in between, or maybe one of the two is the way that you think that actually explains why we have people who are living in poverty. Is it something about the characteristics of the people themselves, that they don't value education, that they're lazy, whatever, that's causing them to be in poverty? Or is it not the problem with the individuals and their own norms and values, but rather with the system itself that unfairly places people into poverty? That's a question that you can explore for yourself.